And so what I want to ask is if there might be in this leveraging of the real world data any methodological advances that could be looked at. So I'll like to hand over to Walter to provide some insights.
Okay, so I'm sorry you have to listen to me at this point of the day with my voice that I have. So, but okay, it will work. I heard the word "why" a lot this afternoon, which is very good. Now, you should know, so you see my affiliation. So I'm in a business school, and in this business school, I deal with technology and innovation management, and more specifically with decision theory. So decision theory, which basically means like, if you have to make a decision, so you assess, so you take the variables, then you appraise, and then you make a decision. So, and in your sector, in our sector, because where I get my mustard from, as they say in Dutch, and so is pharmaceuticals, biotech, is under conditions of high uncertainty. So that's the idea. But you make a decision, just like when you have to cut. In the end, I mean, you appraise, and then there's some benefits and there's some risks, but then you cut, right? So that's the idea. Well, same thing for me. So I think, how can I equip people better to make decisions under high uncertainty? Now, the word is also it's about the why. So the why what? Well, we've been talking about the real world evidence for quite a while now. So if I go back to quite some years ago, so 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, so Berger et al. So it led an ISPOR good practice task force where they said, like, what can we do to enhance the credibility of observational studies? So these observational studies, let me be clear. So again, as a decision theorist, I love RCTs. So RCTs are the gold standard. So what do? You assign, let's say, haphazardly or randomly patients to the one arm and the other arm, and then if you see a difference, and then a significant difference, then you're okay. Okay, good. So, but then still, so there is apparently a need, because there are some domains where this just doesn't work. So when does it doesn't work? Well, it doesn't work, for example, I think Adrian has given the example, a very good one. That's a study that I know about robotics. So in robotics, I mean, it is actually absolutely BS, bullshit, to do an RCT on the robot, because what you're measuring is a robot together with you. That's what we're measuring. And what I'm interested in as a member of, let's say, of the management, which is also a difference between medical devices and pharmaceuticals, because in medical devices you have the hospitals that are deciding, not only the governments, but also the hospitals. Then I'm interested, for example, and the study that I'm referring to there, is that I would be interested in the fact that a young surgeon, if he or she is educated, well, how many interventions should they do before they can reach a certain proficiency level, that they can handle a certain, that's what I'm interested in. Not the fact that this robot is significantly better than, I don't know, something else or something, so that's not really meaningful. So there are domains where this is really not just useful, but actually necessary. Another domain where and that's maybe something you haven't really touched upon, but what I see in practice is when you go into diagnostics. So I'm involved in a project for the moment where we're looking into a new way of doing breast screening. And this breast screening, if you can, so that's what epidemiologists tell me. So if you can, bring this to younger women, then you will have, let's say, a better system performance. Now, to do this, you need to buy this device, and it's the hospital that buys the device. So the hospital, of course, has a mammo screen, has a mammography. So they are equipped. So basically, how can you convince them? Well, you can convince them by saying, like, well, you are doing good for society. But then, of course, here's an economist speaking. I know what people are very close to, so this is very good. But in the end, the hospital will say, like, well, that's very nice. But I mean, if you do an HTA, which you should do, if you do an HTA, then you do an HTA at the level of the system and not at the level of the hospital where they are already equipped. So that basically means that we need to do something, let's say. So here, okay, so sometimes you need real-world evidence. And basically, if I see that, then so in the GCA reports, I think what I absolutely like is that you look into a comparative way. That's also what we teach people. So I say, like, if you make a decision, you go for relative, never for absolute. I'm not interested in absolute. I'm interested in relative to standard of care, for example. And then the degree of certainty of the relative effects, considering the available evidence's strength and limitations. And here, that's where, let's say, you get a little itch, let's say. So because that is very true, because in the end, RCTs are the gold standard, so RWE is not as good, but we have to live with it sometimes. That's the point, yeah? So how can, but of course, it has to be credible. So how can we make this more credible, let's say? That's the point. Actually, in the decision flow, so if you use then as a regulator, if you use this flow here, there's actually maybe take 2 times, maybe one is okay. Just want to take away this, yeah, voilà. The first element is, let's say, the analysis that you make is, well, what are you measuring, basically? So what are the different variables that create the effect, the why of it, why it works? And of course, we all know that there are confounding variables. And here, Oriol, I mean, there's another Spanish that I like very much, which is Miguel Hernan. So Miguel Hernan, who is in Harvard School of Public Health. And I think what he did, he didn't invent the method because it was already invented before. So by Pearl Spiegelhalter, so they already worked on this. But what he absolutely did very splendidly was to say, like, when you do your study, you need to get to this, what is the influencing framework that you have. Just to give an example from real life, a few years ago I did a study on glioblastoma. And I did was when in the good old AI. If you're in the business school, you have to work with all the buzzwords. So that's how it is. So I did a study on machine learning, saying and making use of the very small information that we had. So we had some RCTs on this, and I took these variables in my machine learning study. What did I learn? I learned that age is more important, even more important than we thought about in the RCT. But still, I had an area under the curve. Now, AUC basically means, like, to what extent is my model predicting better than a flip of a coin, right? So, which is the perpendicular line. And that was only 60%. Now, then I talked to a neurologist, and he said, like, well, that's normal. I said, why is normal? Which talks to the communication, by the way. I think you need to, as decision theorists, we need to talk to doctors, so that's normal. So he said, like, well, we now know that there's a genetic influence. And my data came from the Belgian Cancer Registry. So the Belgian Cancer Registry that detects or that registers medication and patient data, but we didn't have any connection with EURTC. So EURTC in Belgium, where you have genetic data from patients, and these databases were not connected to each other. So we couldn't say something about this. And he said, like, I'm pretty sure if you would introduce this, you would get a much better AUC, and you could get to better, advice. So I think involving this this causal inference model, so is I think quite essential. So when you design your test. Next bullet, yeah. So that's one thing. So that is probably something that you don't really see. You don't even see it in pharma, let alone in medical devices. There you also don't really see it. But then I still wasn't happy yet, because we still were struggling with this. Well, okay, well, that's fine. So now you have the effects of these different variables and confounders and what have you. But I don't trust it. So how can we enhance this trust? And there I was a bit inspired, I must say, by Frank, so a colleague. I mean, he actually is a statistician from Michigan State, and he's very active in policy design. Now, in policy design, what do? So how do you measure the effectiveness of policy? Well, you take a diff-in-diff approach. I don't know whether you're familiar with this. So you measure how the situation was before, then you do the intervention, and then you measure what it is afterwards. So that's a diff-in-diff approach. So they are pretty used to this. Now, maybe to the next, but it's a bit too complicated. Next one. I'll come back to this one. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, And yeah, voilà. So yeah, you can ask me questions after the session if you want to know. The point I want to make is that he basically says, like, you know, what you can do is to use what we call a counterfactual approach. And a counterfactual approach basically says, like, you know, you want to answer a statement in the sense of the framework support statement, such as the inference would change, so I would make a different decision if I could find X number of treatment patients who experienced positive outcomes, if they were replaced by hypothetical patients that were not treated. You see what I mean? Huh? So he looks and now to increase, I would say, or to enhance the communication with frequentists, because I'm a Bayesian scientist, so the frequentists, they love the 0.01 and the 0.05. Well, he makes, you can set up this thing here and say, like, well, okay, so if you want to have if you want to be sure about what you're saying here at an 0.01 level, then this is the number of cases that I would have to see before I would change my mind. Yeah? If I'm very sure about what I'm saying, then you can give me any number of cases. I will stick with my opinion. You see what I mean? So that's I thought that was an interesting idea. And then you can express this. So this is now. So he calls it the RIR. Yeah? So the robustness of inference of replacement. So so you start there. So this is like I don't know exactly what it is. It's anti-hypertension treatment and stroke. So maybe you can explain this better than I can. But I mean, so it's a certain biomarker, and this biomarker, let's say in the beginning, you're not very sure about this, but the more you go further. So here you have, let's say, less cases that you would need to change your mind. So that this is a way to communicate results. Voilà. That's what I wanted to say. This needs to be, as a researcher, this needs to be researched further. That's my job, right? So that's, voilà. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. I don't know if we have a couple more minutes, like five minutes to round up. If there are any questions that people would have at this stage? I think that everybody is ready for the end of the day in it, and so I see one brave person.
The dinner is coming, so just a very short comment about the Adrian Griffin presentation, which I found very interesting. I think we have to make a distinction between the industrial aspects and the regulatory aspects. From the industrial perspective, this sector, obviously, you have too many companies. There is probably unexpected way of mergers and acquisitions, as it happens in pharmaceuticals, as it happens in automotive. So this is something that is not a matter for the healthcare system. It's a matter for the industrial aspects. And the other is the regulatory. And obviously, since there is a very high competition, I understand that could be very difficult to apply properly HTA assessment and before JCA assessment. But this is the factor of the life. I think it's something that is very difficult to solve. So you raise the problem, but the solution probably, the only one side of the solution is to improve the industrial sector. But from the regulatory aspects, I think it could be very difficult.
Yeah, so on your first point on the number of companies, that's beyond my pay grade. And I think that's probably from the European Union business side, they've probably got a perspective on that. I would say it's probably in a state of equilibrium. You know, there are innovative companies which come out with technologies and some of them get acquired, yeah, but the business model has existed like that for a while, and it's not for me to disrupt it. On the HTA piece, I think the difficulty I have with what you've stated is, from a pharma perspective, I see where HTA is used and the EU regulation can replace it or replace a significant part of it. So if, and it's a big if if the EU regulation works and the JCA delivers, there is a potential to reduce duplication on the farmer side. A lot of that is dependent on, for example, the people within ICWIG willing to take reviews that have been done by assessors in Portugal. That has yet to be tested. And, you know, that's where the duplication will get reduced. It's not from the company side. But there is an ability there. From a medtech perspective, most markets are not doing HTA at the time of launch. When we bring a product to market, there is no HTA. It's 3 years afterwards if we want a premium price in France. If we don't, it's a very simple process and the procedure gets reimbursed as it does at the moment. You know, there may be an HTA down the line when people want to look at clinical guidelines, but that's not looking at launch. It's looking at a different evidence base and it's asking a different question. So to your point, that the HTA at the time of launch, to impose it on the medical device industry is, one, it's new activity, second, it's an academic exercise at launch, and thirdly, who's the decision maker that's going to use it? Because at the moment, nobody's doing that work in member states. So all of a sudden, it takes me back to the Kevin Costner film, I'm showing my age again now, Field of Dreams. So I don't know if any of you saw it, and he had a farm, and it was like, if you build it, they will come. And he built this baseball ground in the middle of a farm, and then all of a sudden, when he built it, all of these sort of old dead players came out and had a baseball game. And that's effectively what we're saying here. If we build this JCA report, it will get used. But my concern is, I don't know who by. And so, because there is nobody there calling for it. And that's why we have to identify what the question is to make it of value. And I think we're in a very difficult position with this because we've got to deliver something, but how is success going to be measured? And, you know, to Maya's point, this is going to get reviewed in 2028. So we need to have clarity on what we're going to deliver from next year and how we're going to determine it's a success. If we get 6 reports out, for example, you know, number out of the air on medical devices that wouldn't have had a report otherwise, yes, we've ticked a box, we've done 6 JCAs of medical devices. You'll probably have 5.5 companies going, that was a laborious exercise and nobody's paying for my device, you know, because it hasn't linked to access. But actually, if we then work with the, you know, notified bodies or, you know, the expert panels and say, actually, what we've recognized here is this, you know, we can approve it, it'll get through a regulatory decision on this evidence, but ideally what health systems want is this long-term follow-up on these endpoints. We could actually systematically put something in place that, to your point, actually, you know, then, you know, everybody, every patient gets recruited and you generate that database. Then there is no issue around cause and inference, because actually if your database contains 90% or more of the patients, you know, the outcome is the outcome, you know.
Great. As clinician that works with device companies, I think that sometimes we need more transparency, perhaps, regarding cost of production, cost of development, the technology, the solution, not the same a company who copy, follow, and also the real-time data. What about being more transparent regarding the cost of development and products?
Well, yeah,
I know that is a complex.
Yeah, it's a very complex question, and that's way above my pay grade. But you can see it at a macro level, because if medical device companies were that profitable, then their share price would be higher, and their multiples of of earnings and profitability would be way above others. What I can say is that when you look at industries, pharmaceuticals tends to lag somewhere below the tobacco industry. Okay, so actually what we're saying as society is we value tobacco companies more than medical device companies or pharmaceuticals. And even the alcohol industry, the last time I looked, had a higher profit to earnings ratio, price to earnings ratio above healthcare. So I hear what you say. I don't believe it. And you know, when you get to the product level, well, then you're talking about generics effectively, because if you're looking at price, then you've actually got to factor in all of the R&D, the cost of the products that don't make it, and the evolutionary life cycle there.
But when we see public tendering in Europe, and I see how the companies drop the price, I ask myself why a few months ago was totally different. That's why.
Well, I'll give you one other then. So the drug-eluting stent example that we had earlier, we were one of the first companies that had one with Cypher back in the day. We went through the NICE process. We did the similar one across Europe. And then when those products were re-reviewed 2 years later, and the class was genericized, we switched the lights off and we got out of that market, because it was, you know, we are an innovative company. And if we can't get a return on investment to satisfy tomorrow's patients and deliver innovations for them, then we're not in it. You know, if once the category has been genericized, there are other companies that will build it cheap, stack it high, you know, and sell it off for you. But you know, we're in it for the innovations.
Great. I'd like to just thank Adrian, Andrea, and Walter, and then turn it back to York, because I know it's already 1:15. York.
Thank you, Yves. Thank Walter, and thanks to all of you. Big applause. EAA is a full supporter of evidence generation. Hearing about, let's say, 500,000 devices on the market with half of the spend in the pharmaceutical area, I'm of course concerned about the evidence we have for all of the devices. I'm a full supporter of, let's say, a UHJ and increasing the level of evidence. So here we are.